Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses the potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rogers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and joining us again is Rick Gurba. Rick is the Director of VFIS Education, Training, and Consulting, and throughout his career spanning more than 3 decades, the subject of retention and recruitment is repeatedly discussed as one of the top issues facing volunteer fire and EMS organizations. He and I have talked about the significant investment made by FEMA and many of the national and state fire and EMS organizations who have worked to address this issue. There have been many success stories as a result. However, the issue of retention and recruitment remain at or near the top of the list of challenges faced by many chief officers. Rick is here to discuss his thoughts on rethinking volunteer retention and recruitment. Welcome back to the program, Rick. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me again, Chris.
So why did you place retention ahead of recruitment in this title?
That's a good question. It was done with the intent to shift the emphasis on first taking care of the volunteers that you have within the organization. Most any employer will tell you that it's less costly to retain an individual versus hiring a new equivalent replacement. And unless that individual has prior and recent experience with the organization, bringing a new person into the organization is not necessarily a one-for-one replacement. The knowledge, skills, and abilities of the new volunteer will most likely fall short of the individual they are replacing, simply because it will take time for them to get up to speed with the latest SOPs and SOGs, training requirements, and developing a relationship with the line officers and administrative leadership.
So in other words, I think what you're saying is take care of the current volunteer members to build a solid foundation of personnel.
Exactly. If you're constantly recruiting new, untrained volunteers and not paying attention to the ones that you have, you'll eventually run out of experienced and qualified individuals to meet the needs of the organization. There are a number of ways to do this, which we will outline together as we talk here in a few moments, as well as some soon-to-be-released online resources that we have in development on these topics. But I'm first going to propose something the VFIS team has talked about for some time. Are you ready to hear it?
I am a big boy, so I think I'm ready to hear it.
All right. So we are suggesting to totally separate the functions of retention and recruitment altogether. I can tell you I've had a number of discussions both within VFIS and from people across the country, and their thoughts are similar to ours in that the functions of retention and recruitment are so different from one another. Retention is more about getting to know your volunteers to gain a better understanding of their needs, wants, and driving motivation for volunteering within the organization. And recruitment differs in that it actually occurs outside of the organization. So a person in charge of retention is best performed by someone who knows a lot about the organization, how it operates, and must be good with people. And the president or someone else who is chosen to designate this person should select this individual carefully because not everyone is well suited for this role. And where possible, it shouldn't be an officer or board member of the organization unless absolutely necessary. And you may want to consider seeking someone from outside the organization to perform this role. The person leading the recruitment team is, in some cases, in simplest terms, the role that many of us can relate to is that of a marketing person. While the current volunteer personnel may be best to reach out to individuals, whether it be friends and such in the community, who may want to join the organization, an individual who is present at community activities, recruiting at football games and other sporting events, attends community events and business meetings, requires a much different skill set than that of a person who's in charge of member retention.
Rick, I want to go back to something that we talked about earlier. Like I said, when we talked earlier, you mentioned that professional development is a part of retention activities. How does that fit in?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that point. ESOs do a lot to develop their personnel to be interior firefighters, EMTs, drivers, pump operators, and rescue technicians. But how much does the ESO invest in developing the other skills that are needed on the administrative side of the organization? Things such as IT support, annual training programs, website maintenance, public information officers, fundraising, supervisor training, and the next generation of organization leaders are just some of the ways we can match the desire, talent, and skills of these new volunteers to the needs of the organization. So this is typically identified by the person in charge of retention. Their role should include developing that individual by assisting them in obtaining training and education that will provide an overall benefit to the organization. And if you take this out of the fire and EMS industry and compare it to private business, some of the most successful companies develop personnel from within to build a long-term employment relationship. While employers may no longer have a lifelong employees as they once did, companies can realize a significant benefit by developing an employee through training and education, which in turn then retains that individual for several more years.
Rick, can you describe the importance of having periodic performance reviews with volunteers?
Sure. The importance of having a review with the individual at least one time a year will help individuals stay on track with their goals established by the operational and administrative officers in the organization, and reassesses the individual's level of interest in the organization. Quality volunteers are hard to come by and even harder to retain, so the time spent with the individual will assist in the retention effort simply by spending time with them. Valuable feedback on the ESO could be obtained from the meeting as well. And while the time spent is important on that meeting, even more important is the action taken and follow-up on the recommendations made by the retention leader.
I was going to follow up on the question that you just answered. What about exit interviews? Are those, they might not always be possible, but you could possibly learn from some mistakes that might have been made or just ways that we can improve that retention model?
Absolutely. Exit interviews are a critical component to any organization in terms of understanding what is causing the individual to leave and using that as a QA mechanism to try to improve the overall business operation. So individuals have a tendency to leave for, primarily I'd think 3 reasons. There's either a clique or leadership problem within the organization. Their personal life has changed significantly, either due to a health situation or a job situation that's taking them out of the area. And then there's a multitude of other reasons that kind of fit into the third category. So an exit interview gives you that guidance and helps you provide ways to improve the organization.
So where can a volunteer department find a person with a skill set to manage their retention program?
So the answer is kind of the same as guidance that has come from a lot of recruitment and retention programs from prior years. You can look to municipal or county government and larger businesses, especially in the rural areas of the country. For some of the metropolitan areas, that might be easier to access. Those entities may have trained HR personnel who can volunteer their services or assist someone from your organization to meet that need. The one additional resource to consider today, due to being much more readily available, is that of virtual connections to people who want to volunteer their services. So don't limit yourselves to your community. Reach out to a corporation who may have the resources to assist you and are committed to helping nonprofit organizations.
Rick, can you give the listeners an idea on future topics related to retention and recruitment?
Certainly. Our goal is to have a variety of resources, including more podcasts, webinars, articles, checklists, and an entire manual covering the broad category of retention and recruitment. These topics will include a self-assessment of your systems and processes, the need and importance of having job descriptions, and most importantly, knowing exactly what the personnel needs are of your organization. And just as important is knowing when to pause your recruitment process. If you become overwhelmed with new volunteers, but don't have the resources to mentor and train them, those individuals are likely to become frustrated and possibly leave.
Rick, I'm going to wrap up our conversation with one last question. Can you provide one suggestion to ESOs on their retention and recruitment efforts?
I think the most important aspect in recruiting is having a clear understanding and well-defined descriptions for each position you seek to fill. As we described earlier, the marketing person can be the best in communicating with people in your community, But if the effort doesn't match the needs of the ESO, the recruiting effort is likely to be off target and possibly fall short of the goal. Rather than a shotgun approach where you advertise for volunteers needed, be more specific with both the operations and administration positions you need to fill.
Rick, that was a lot of great information. It was a pleasure to see you again, and thank you for joining the program.
Thanks, Chris.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program today and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guest, Rick Gurba, once again for his time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Future programs will discuss many more of the exposures facing those in the emergency services industry, and we'll highlight ways to help reduce your risk. Also, if you like what you've heard today, please consider leaving a comment or a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing us at VFISriskcontrol@VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.